manager that you select, that's going to be the first step in the process, is to, again, understand how the business operates and where does that risk lie. And Scott, why don't you go ahead and post the next polling question.
All right, that's up. Thank you very much. How would you rate your knowledge of captive insurance companies? Just a basic question here. Maybe now that you've seen the content for a little while, you can answer this one a little more accurately. And again, we're going to get our results up here to at least 95%. And most of you falling into the category of none or fair, and more into fair than anything, about almost 50% of you. Let me go ahead and close this down. We got up to our 95% really quickly there, so thank you for that. And here are the results. And Brian, let me just make sure that when we close it down, I'll confirm that we go back to your PowerPoints. It usually just happens once in the beginning, but let's see if I cursed us by saying that. So, nope, we're good. We're back to your PowerPoint, so no problems this time. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Now, one of the last things I want to focus on, really on the benefit side of captives, because we also want to make this a balanced presentation on some of the obstacles why people don't decide to do these IRS scrutiny, is really where we're going to spend most of our time today. I think the benefits are fairly easy for everybody to understand on this call. It's going to be in some of the obstacles. But in terms of how these captives are owned, you could have this captive owned by the business itself. That is one way to set up a captive. However, we have to be careful when we decide to have the captive owned by the business of something called risk shifting. So whatever entity is owned by the captive cannot be an insured of the captive and deduct the premium. So generally when we set these up, we would have the shareholders or the next generation or some key employees own the captive. Now, for large Fortune 500 companies, they're always going to be part of the organization because they have enough entities to make this work. Now, I would say the most common way for ownership is the shareholders of the business. Now,
and Brian, I'd just like to make a comment here. I met with a distribution company this morning here in Denver that services the oil and gas industry. Classic example, the company is an LLC. It's owned 60% by the father and 40% by the son, and so the captives that we're setting up, we're setting up one captive, will be 60% owned by the father and 40% owned by the son. They're also considering having some of the captive owned by some of the key employees, and unlike a 401k where you cannot discriminate and pick which employees will own, have a 401k. With a captive, they've got several people in middle management, but they only have two that they really want to have involved. And so in this case, 60% will be owned by the father, 40% will be by the son, and then they're thinking about carving 20% or reducing each of their ownership by 20% and having that owned by two key employees. This is a type of golden handcuffs, obviously. And this adds a complexity to the transaction, but the long-term effect can be very, very, very beneficial.
Right. And I think key employees, I mean, the interesting thing about these micro captives is you're basically setting up a 401k plan that I guess you could arguably discriminate on in terms of who's going to be in. There's no cap. If you assume $1.2 million is no cap. And the proceeds are going to come out at a potentially